Hollywood has always been beset with struggles and tensions around representation. In recent years, however, we've seen the emergence of something different, a weird, relativist expansion in the scope of on-screen diversity. Colorblind casting resulting in a black actress portraying the real-life historical white Anne Boleyn, a black actress playing an 11th century Danish Viking, black and Asian Regency-era English gentry and shire folk, Victorian England as agreeably multiracial in the world of David Copperfield and Great Expectations. Modern film and TV showrunners no longer have any inhibitions in dispensing with historical accuracy and portraying the past as they wish it was, as it would have been more suitably nice to have been, to repurpose it to be more inclusively positive for a modern audience. And now, flowing from this trend of fictional reimagining, we have a further step into relativism with the Netflix documentary series African Queens. The series, produced and narrated by Jada Pinkett Smith, depicts the Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra, who was controversially played by a black actress. Up until recently, showrunners have usually pushed back against criticism over diverse casting choices by framing the critics as fragile and out-of-touch reactionaries who are all in their feelings. But in this case, it is Egyptians who are accusing the Netflix documentary of blackwashing and not depicting their cultural icon as being of Macedonian Greek descent. An Egyptologist and former Antiquities Minister of Egypt said, "This is completely fake. Cleopatra was Greek, meaning that she was light-skinned, not black," adding that Netflix is trying to provoke confusion by spreading false and deceptive facts that the origin of the Egyptian civilization is black. Director Tina Garavi, who admits that she does not know if Cleopatra was black, said her desire was to bring Cleopatra into the 21st century. "I am proud to stand with Queen Cleopatra," she wrote, "a reimagined Cleopatra." This is a terribly indulgent idea, dispensing with a commitment to history as a matter of record in favor of history as you ideally envisage it being. One beauty of fiction is that everything an author of a novel describes will be visualized differently in the mind's eye of every reader. Every story, whilst the same in its plot, setting, and characters, is also a highly personal, unique experience. Fiction is the ideal medium for that. Fiction is also the ideal expressive medium for wish fulfillment. History, as a discipline, as a chronicle of real lives, is not. What Pinkett Smith and Tina Garavi are doing is historical impressionism. Impressionist artists of the 19th century were not trying to paint a reflection of real life, but a stylized impression of how they perceived the person, light, atmosphere, object, or landscape. This is beautiful in the realm of art, but inappropriate in the realm of historical biography. It also has to be said that in a contemporary culture that is extremely strict when it comes to any perceived cultural appropriation, what is on display here is an act of biographical appropriation. The movie in which Elizabeth Taylor played Cleopatra was designed purely for entertainment, and therefore had some creative license. John Wayne as Genghis Khan was completely ridiculous and miscast, but the filmmakers never suggested that Genghis was born in Iowa. This latest incident is part of an ongoing tension of Hollywood producing content that is infused with identity politics around representation and diversity, with good intentions not always leading to good outcomes. Post-colonial theory in academia centers the experience and perspectives of the colonized, deconstructs the narrative of Rule Britannia jingoistic heritage, and emphasizes a somber, revisionist contrition when it comes to the past. When you take the gist of that as an attitude and couple it with a multicultural modern society, with multicultural actors and actresses coming out of film and theater schools, and a general gist that breaking down boundaries to representation and roles is positive, then we get an understanding of how we've reached the present state of things. After all, a typical person might think there's been bigotry in the past, prejudice still lingers and hinders the potential of some in contemporary society, so why not make use of every means to allow for equal opportunity, equal representation, have no limitations other than inherent talent and work ethic? Well, this is absolutely true in practically every facet of life. Skin color should be no impediment to whom you call when your boiler is broken, or if you're hiring a solicitor, or you're a coach selecting your best midfielder. But acting, as a profession, is different because actors should, at least to a basic degree, correspond to the role they're auditioning for. If we decide that such basic distinctions are more or less arbitrary, or a dated social construct, and an impediment to talented actors being able to realize their full potential, then all of a sudden we're in a crazy town of relativism. You have producers and showrunners who want to simultaneously express that the British Empire was exploitative and exclusionary, whilst supporting the depiction in period drama Jane Austen fever dream romance shows of inaccurately inclusive racial social acceptance and mobility, on the grounds that it sets a good example of empowerment for a younger diverse audience. You can have a Georgian period TV show which features two desirable, socially integrated young Indian bachelorettes who are thriving and flirtatiously at play in an England whose mercantile class, we also need to be reminded, is, during the girls' romantic and racially and socially harmonious frolicking, ruthlessly exploiting and sucking dry a hapless India of the Raj because the natives there are rather inferior and unrefined. What if we really, genuinely weigh up the notion that with someone like Jodie Turner-Smith, the story of Anne Boleyn isn't centered around race or class, but in fact around womanhood? That the most compelling aspect of her life was her challenges in navigating a male-dominated world, having intensely strict expectations upon her to realize a role, with high stakes if she didn't fulfill her prescribed destiny. And that these tensions, being intrinsically understood and expressed by an actress, supersedes the idea of her race. This almost works. Or you can see how it could be tempting for some to want it to work. But you don't want that commitment to historical accuracy to be needlessly undermined by a comprehensive historical inaccuracy. Let's test things further and ask, if an actor's incongruous background has an effect on the credibility of a work, then why does this not apply to, for example, Denzel Washington playing an 11th century King of Scotland in Macbeth? Well, Shakespeare is high art, which means the text, the work, has a sublime beauty, and the identities of the actors, or players, are subsumed within and completely in service to the material. In much the same way, a South Korean piano prodigy renders sonatas by Beethoven, or an opera diva of African descent performs an aria in Mozart's The Magic Flute. There's a distinction most people can understand between that arena of high art and a titillating lowest common denominator load of old bollocks like Bridgerton. There's an even deeper question and tension here. Is there a cultural understanding where the door only swings one way? White actors can't play black roles because blackness is a lived experience, its own narrative, formed from accrued layers of particular, often bad experiences, and a unique perspective of the world, and therefore a white person attempting to play a role of color is a kind of presumption, an incursion, an act of undermining the authenticity of that formulation of identity, informed with experiences of marginalization, prejudice, and unique spirit of being a person of color. If you believe that, as a progressively minded person, then you also have to believe two other things. One, that whiteness, as a state of being, isn't composed of or heavily tinged by tensions of identity and acceptance, and is therefore a kind of experiential blank slate onto which any actor, of any ethnicity, can develop their characterization of a role. And secondly, as a progressive, you're going to get tangled up in other forms of identity politics. Whenever someone like Macy Gray or J.K. Rowling tries to suggest that girlhood is its own fundamental informing narrative, and that trans women can't entirely be women because they didn't go through that foundational experience, they get hammered by progressive people on social media who believe that you don't need those formative experiences and background to be a fully fledged woman as a trans person. Which means it would have to follow that foundational experiences and identity aren't defining or necessary in your ultimate identity formulation. So what's lived experience and what isn't? Can you hold all of those contrasting notions in your head at once, without the house of cards at least trembling a little bit? In terms of representation, diversity, and inclusivity, Hollywood has undergone a bit of an overcorrection. Not in terms of proportionality of roles, but in terms of scope and context in which diversity can be presented. There is an endless number of stories to be told about figures and events in history, providing wonderful opportunities for actors of color. Everyone would welcome the development of such works, and they would have a far greater and enduring impact than much of the current content of repurposed or reimagined stories.